Hi, strategy folks. Coming to you today to talk about one of my favorite areas of strategy, external analysis in general, both of the internal and external environment is something that I think is very, very interesting. And I know from experience that many MBA programs, many doctoral programs will spend quite a bit of time on different types of analysis. Some programs have separate courses that are allocated toward that study. It's really interesting. It is intuitive to a great extent, maybe more so than some of the other aspects of strategy that we cover. People tend to understand what it means to evaluate your situation, look at where you are positioned, and the need for that in order to make a plan on how to accomplish some goal. And there's lots of different things that are involved in the internal and external environments. Particularly when we talk about the external environment, we think about the pestle model, and we think about all the different areas that most textbooks recommend that we study. We look at the political arena, sociocultural trends and happenings, the legal environment, all the different things that make up our external environment. But I want to share with you some interesting thoughts that I've come across in my study of analysis, because I think that they provide a little bit of a different perspective, and I think it's a really interesting one. And we're going to move from the really academic, sort of ethereal approach to external analysis to some things that are a little bit more practical and a little bit closer to industry. So first, the academic piece of it. There is a concept in strategy literature and in management literature called environmental enactment. And basically the concept of environmental enactment is this: the typical approach to an external analysis is that we recognize the organization and its internal processes, and then we recognize an external environment in which the focal organization has to operate. And for a lot of the things we do, it's a helpful heuristic, and it provides a lot of material for decision making. But environmental enactment takes a little bit of a different approach. Environmental enactment says, listen, what if there's not an objective environment outside the organization that we are responding to, but instead what we do, how we perceive things, what actions we take, all these things sort of combine, and we are actually creating an environment, right? We are responsible for the environment that we think that we are reacting to. And so I know that's a little bit confusing, but to me, it's a very interesting perspective to take, right? And the reason why this idea has some merit is because of some of the more practical applications of it, right? When we think of our external environment, we've got our pestle models, we've got our business level Porter's 5 forces framework, and these different things. But we have a lot of discretion, both as leaders in an organization and as the organization itself, in determining our environment, what we respond to, right? For example, we are responsible for our geographic footprint, right? We choose where we do business and where we don't. We choose what industry that we're in, and what area of that industry and what aspects of that industry that we want to focus on. To a large extent, and this, we'll talk more about this in a little bit, we determine who our competitors are. And competitive dynamics is one very practical application of this idea that we'll talk about more in a minute. But for the moment, it's we we decide, or we determine in some instances, who we think we are competing with, right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, environmental enactment has some points to make, right? We're making all these choices, and the sum total of those choices determine our environment, right? So that's a little bit of it's very academic. It's very not grounded so much in hard and fast objective facts, but it's an interesting perspective. Now, if you move toward some more practical applications of this, I think one of the big applications is in competitive dynamics, right? So when we think of competitive dynamics, we mentioned that sometimes you choose who you think you compete with. Well, in competitive dynamics, there's a researcher named Ming-Jer Chen that's very well known in the strategy literature. And Dr. Chen has been involved in studying competitive dynamics for a long time. And in a lot of his work, what he has found sort of supports the environmental enactment piece, right? And I'm paraphrasing here, but think about this. If I'm an organization, right, and I'm doing business, and it doesn't matter what business it's in, I choose my environment, I choose my geographic footprint, I choose what services or what products to offer. I make a lot of choices. And then somebody else outside of my organization takes an action. Well, what is my response to that? Well, that depends on how I interpret that other organization and what they're doing, right? If I interpret that act by another organization as a competitive act, right? Is if I recognize them as a competitor, then the things that they do, the things that organization tries to accomplish, their goals, their actions, will, in some instances, drive my behavior, right? It will affect the decisions I make and the approach I have to the environment. Okay, the same principle. There's an organization out there that takes action, but I don't recognize that organization as a competitor, then I might not respond at all, right? So in that regard, from the perspective of competitive dynamics, it's very, very important for the organization to be intentional about how they are crafting and how they are developing their environment. Because, the choice to interpret someone or some organization as a competitor or not will drive behavior for our organization, right? And that's very, very important. And so, there are instances of empirical studies that support this. Dr. Chen has some research out there, some literature out there that points to that general idea. There was a study in 2009, Santos and Eisenhart, and they looked at emerging markets. And what they found is that in emerging markets, those organizations, those businesses, those firms that are actively trying to affect the environment and trying to create rules and boundaries in that industry tend to outperform those that are more passive, right? So that's another example of a evidence that suggests, to the extent that I can craft my environment, right, that I can make choices about my environment. In other words, if I can influence my environment, I can set the rules of the game. And obviously, if I am successful at setting the rules of the game, it is more than likely that I will set rules that are beneficial to my organization, right? So again, the idea is, there's not just this objective world out there that we are responding to, but we are actively creating things and putting things in place that we eventually respond to. So That's the idea of environmental enactment and the associated applications in emerging markets and competitive dynamics is something that's always interested me. I like having some things that are a little bit different and a little bit outside of conventional thinking. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. I'd love to talk more about it. I already mentioned Minjur Chen as a researcher on competitive dynamics. There is another researcher, Dr. Linda Smirchich, Smircich, and she did a lot of work. She's got a seminal article on environmental enactment, and that it's several years old now. She did some of this work in the 80s, but it's been very, very influential. And then, of course, that article, Santos and Eishart, 2009, really interesting about if you're interested in entrepreneurship, nascent or emerging markets. That's a good article to pick up. Hope this has been interesting. Good luck.